Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'm John Elkington, and as I was getting ready to leave home this morning, I was reading a cutting of the Austrian stuntman who is going to jump from 23 miles later on this summer. His name is Felix Baumgartner. You may know about him. And I was thinking, I'm just feeling more or less the same as he probably will do as he jumps out of that space vehicle or whatever. He will break the sound barrier on the way down, so we're told. I hope we won't. I hope we're going to have a really good day. I'm going to introduce the session, and I'm going to go straight into our first set of speakers. So the atmosphere of the day, hopefully, rather than being about breaking the sound barrier, will be more in the spirit of conversation. We've got some wonderful people in the room today, and there are a bunch of people who will be arriving later on during the day. And the values of transparency, candor, honesty, all of that will be really important. Hashtag, for those who want to tweet, is up there on the left-hand corner. And the notion of the sofa is just simply talk to the people next to you, and I'm sure you'll find some extraordinary people to talk to. Just a warning, all of this is absolutely open. The proceedings will be filmed, are being filmed, and will be posted on several websites subsequently. And just a little bit of history. Some of you may remember Thomas Newcomen from history lessons. 300 years ago exactly, he created the first working atmospheric steam engine, which enabled our species to break into the fossil fuels account. And much of the wealth that our societies have created, and many of us have enjoyed subsequently, came from those fossil fuels. But I just want to put up a list of other people, and you'll have seen some of them in on the banners as you came in and on some of the screens. And it's exactly 170 years ago that Karl Marx met Friedrich Engels. It took them 6 years to produce the Communist Manifesto. But if you think back, what then happened was, although communism did not very often directly influence and socialize capitalism, other political approaches, socialism, social democracy, did. The second person along from the left is Joseph Schumpeter. Many of you will recognize him, another Austrian. It's 70 years since he published his definitive book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And he basically talked, as you know, about creative destruction. And my sense is that we're in one of these periodic, but not very frequent, periods of creative destruction where everything starts to melt down around us, which is a terror in some ways, but is an immense opportunity to do old things in new ways, and particularly to do new things. The next two people, Rachel Carson and Thomas Kuhn, both put out books in the same year, 1962, so 50 years ago. Rachel Carson, you'll recall, basically spurred the evolution of the modern environmental movement with her book, Silent Spring. Thomas Kuhn, though, for me, was one of these transformative writers. I read him when I was about 14 or 15, and his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, introduced the notion of paradigm shifts. Now, we use that term all the time now, and by that we mean very often a new formulation of toothpaste or whatever. That's not what he meant. What he meant was there are periods where the way we see our world, the way we experience reality, changes and changes forever. So you think about the moment in which the species woke up to the fact that instead of the sun going around the Earth went round the sun. Really quite a difficult moment for the species. Then 1972, 40 years ago, the year of the Stockholm Environment Conference, but also you had the Limits to Growth study, and representing that team, not just the Club of Rome, but the authors of that study, Jürgen Randers, who's just done a book looking out to 2052, so 40 years forward, and not wildly positive reading in some key respects. So, for example, they're predicting a 2 degrees further warming by 2052. So quite a problem. And then, although we're tending to focus on the Rio plus 20 time horizon, so 20 years back to the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, I think it's also worth remembering Gro Harlem Brundtland and the Brundtland Commission's report of 1987. And some of you will be going on this evening to the Battlebridge room, which many of you started in, for the Guardian Sustainable Business Awards. And one person you'll hear about there is Ray Anderson. And I think we should acknowledge the role that a growing number of CEOs and other business leaders are playing in trying to drive some of this agenda forward. So enough of history, just a few thanks. I won't read all of the people listed here, but a very significant number of organizations have played critical roles. But I particularly like to pull out the Innovation and Arts and Value Web teams who have been absolutely extraordinary in helping us get all of this together. And on the program, you'll find out a little bit more about the partners and sponsors and so on. There have been 4 curators of this conference listed here, and they'll be your moderators for the 4 sessions today. David Christie, and I'll read this off, would like to thank James, Keshi, Michael, Anthony, and Michelle. I'd like to thank all of those, and in addition, from our team, Amanda, Gianna, Charmian, and Sam. Kelly Clark of Tellus Mater or Tellus Mater, depending which side of the Atlantic you come from, would like to thank her trustees. And Colin LeDuc of Generation Investment Management would like to thank the partners of Generation and the trustees of the Generation Foundation. And we thank them all for their involvement. Now, just one extraordinary fact. Some of you will know, but this room and all of the wood in it comes from a single oak tree, which when I heard that, I found that must have been some tree. And I, just by way of thank you to that particular oak. But in some ways, what we're here to do today is not simply take part an old order like that oak tree or in the Schumpeterian style to sort of break down an old economy, but genuinely to look forward. Where are the saplings of new growth coming from? Where are the acorns? Where should we be planting them? And just a quick note, there are no fire alarms slated for today. If we do hear anything, don't panic. The entrances are at the back there, and the ushers will see you to safety fairly quickly. Now, oaks live for quite a long time. And just as I came in, somebody came up and said, very interesting to see the study, the future quotient, which we did a couple of years back. And in that report, we reached a conclusion, which is that many people in the corporate social responsibility and sustainability spaces would tend to feel that we're on a sort of fairly steady trajectory towards a better world. I don't feel that. I think that in many ways we know what the big challenges are. We know what the agenda should be, but very often we're failing to really punch through and drive change at the nature and scale that is required. So some people talk about the chasm, and this is something you have to cross or bridge in order to get to real fundamental change. And the question is, why these problems? And one of the most fundamental, and we'll hear several of the speakers pick up on it earlier on, is demographics. It's partly just sheer numbers of people around the world. This diagram, many of you will recognize the general approach. It shows population growth from 1990 to 2015, and it's very clear where the bulk of that population is developing. But then the whole issue of lifestyles and consumption patterns factors in very importantly. And one of the metaphors I find myself using increasingly is of the sound barrier. You may remember that in the late 40s, jet aircraft started to slam into what they subsequently came to call the sound barrier in midair. Quite a number of planes broke up, their pilots were killed. And at the time, there were people who argued that this was a physical barrier that could never be breached. And in the same way, in 1954, Roger Bannister was pushing against that 4-minute mile barrier. And there are many people who argue that it was a physiological barrier. You would never get through that. Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier, and then a bunch of other people did. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, and then a bunch of other people did. Very often the barriers, and in this case we're talking about the sustainability barrier, is in our own brains, in our own minds. And only one person here, I think, will be carrying the Olympic torch. Casper, I'm not sure whether you've done that yet? No. It's still coming. But there's a glory. My own sort of equivalent of the torch is a book that you'll see hopefully a little later on today, The Zeronauts, and today is its formal launch. And we have our favorite local bookshop, the London Review bookshop, which will have a stand upstairs. And it won't simply be spotlighting that book. What we did was to ask our network to list their favorite books in this sort of breakthrough capitalism space. And we came up with 70, boiled down to 50. And then there's a short list, a baker's dozen of 13, which will be spotlighted and for sale upstairs. Towards a conclusion, in the book and today we'll be talking about one scenario, but in the context of two others. First is breakdown, second is change as usual, and the third one in the title of the event, breakthrough capitalism. And if you look at Greece at the moment, which I'm sure many of you are nervously doing, the implications for the Eurozone are fairly frightening. But again, if you look at the work of people like the Stockholm Resilience Centre, and you look at climate change, you look at loss of biodiversity, you look at nutrient enrichment of shallow seas and so on, absolutely no question that different parts of the world are in breakdown trajectory. And so we're seeing that in the sorts of innovators and entrepreneurs who come through our office. And just a couple of weeks ago, somebody who came in through the office who I've known for many years, but didn't know what he's now up to. This is what he's up to. He's basically talking about streaming titanium dioxide into the stratosphere, 65,000 feet up, using a hose in order to create a sunscreen for the entire Earth. So it's a form of geoengineering. And at times, I really hope we never get to this point, but increasingly I think we may find ourselves headed in that direction. Change as usual, well, there's no question that public interest campaigns have achieved some really important results. Fair trade is one example of the labeling approaches in different parts of the world, and a range of different reporting activities are out there. So Global Reporting Initiative, the International Integrated Reporting Council, and so on. But if you think about the companies that are, for example, producing reports, BP was a very good reporter. If you look at the Fukushima disaster, what you find is that the Tokyo Electric Power Company in 2004 set itself some really stretch zero-based waste targets. So good work going on, but not always addressing the underlying system changes. And many of you will know of the work of Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, Shared Value. There was a special issue or a special cover of the Harvard Business Review. A lot of people talking about that approach. Really important, I think, but just to make a fundamental point, I don't think that either social responsibility or shared value are really the same as what at least I think my colleagues and I would understand by sustainability. And it's interesting that there's a survey that's just been done, this is the second bullet point, by Globescan and Sustainability. And this is part of their regeneration project. And this was 1,400 experts around the world. And 3/4 of them felt basically that we've got to drive system change, that simply doing change as usual is not going to work. It's basically about an intergenerational process of winding down old economic models and creating new ones. And some of you may have seen just last week, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development launched a new report. This is a follow-on from their Vision 2050 study. And it's talking about the role of governments in framing the markets to which business then responds. And I think it's really interesting to see leading corporate champions of change really now putting pressure on governments to play their part in all of this. So final scenario, and this is where we are today, is the breakthrough scenario. And I've just, there are four logos here. One is the Grameen Foundation. I think it's fascinating what's called reverse innovation, where you see work that's happening in developing countries, emerging economies, starting to flash across into the more developed world. I think that's a pattern we'll see a lot more of. The second logo is Vestas and its WindMade campaign, basically trying to get a link back to consumers to give them a sense of where renewable energy has been used to create the products that they are buying or using. The third one is Buckminster Fullerene. Many of you will have seen recently the story of graphene, this astonishing new material that's been developed by two scientists based at Manchester University. Potentially very exciting technology. But on the right there, one of the organizations that I like best, the X Prize Foundation, you could say that they're mad at times, but Google, as you know, have put up a $30 million prize for the first people who can, in the private sector, who can get robots and have them onto the moon and have them independently move about and send back useful data. So good luck with your entries to that. You'll see in the Battlebridge room there's a stand for Autodesk. They're offering what I find a fascinating book for free. There's a copy for all of you there, Imagine, Design and Create. And one of the areas that I find absolutely riveting these days is biomimicry. And it's one of the areas that we cover in the Zeronauts, but is also quite well covered in the Autodesk book. So those are the three scenarios. The four sessions that we will be going through today, if I can get this to work. Well, let me, just while I'm waiting for that to unfreeze, although Joe Confino of The Guardian has apparently had problems, well, he's at the back. Joe, have you actually broken through now onto Wi-Fi?
Break through Wi-Fi rather than break through capitalism. Yeah.
But you've got there, good. So those of you who want to sort of connect here, the link is, the network is King's Place Events, and the password is BreakCap2012. So all lowercase. So unfortunately, this is frozen. So what I think I will do is, can I just check whether, oh, it hasn't, good. I got here at 7 in the morning and I'm a reptile, so it takes me a while to wake up. So these are the four sessions. We've got question and answer sessions in three of them. And the session that we're now going to go into, like all of the others, will have three, we call them snapshot presentations. They're very punchy, brief presentations. We might call them quickfire sessions as well. And the theme is the future's already here, so that you can actually already see a better future just by looking around the landscape. So these are the speakers in the first session. What I'd like to do is call Pamela to the stage.